Shadow of the Erdtree has blessed us with over 100 new weapons, most of which coming with their own unique abilities, making them super powerful and super fun when you create the best build around them. And of course today, as the title and the thumbnail suggests, I'm going to be showing you my personal top 5 weapons from the DLC. Of course this should hopefully go without saying, but as I've just mentioned, it is my personal top 5, so it's what I consider to be my 5 most powerful and most fun weapons to use in the DLC so far, but feel free to spark some conversation about what weapons you would feature in your top 5s, because I would love to know what your top 5 weapons are. And yes, I will also show you the builds for the weapons that we discuss so that you can mimic the insane damage that I will show you in the background. So with all of that out of the way, let's just jump straight into this insane top 5 list. So to kick this off, at the number 5 spot, we've got our first and only boss remembrance weapon, and as you can see, that is none other than Rellana's Twin Blades. Personally, for me, I feel like this is the best boss weapon that the DLC has offered, and that's mainly because I love quick, free-flowing DPS weapons, which is exactly what Rellana's Twin Blades are. Where they're part of a brand new weapon category being a light greatsword, they can do tremendous amounts of damage just with their regular light and heavy attacks. But the beautiful thing about it being Rellana's weapon is we also copy her stance and her movesets entirely. The other benefit with these Twin Blades is they're also infused with both magic and fire damage, so along with the relatively okay physical damage that comes on these weapons, with the added magic and fire damage, just with a simple light attack, you're more or less going to be doing 1000 damage every time that you hit your enemy. Of course, this can be buffed even higher with the right talismans and boosts, which we'll come to in a moment, but the Ash of War is also versatile as well, because again, you'll have 2 options, whether that's using the magic side of things and using the transient moonlight sort of attacks, similar to that of the Moonveil, to hit your enemies at range and use Rellana's combo with that, or if you want to use a much more devastating version of the Ash of War, you can use the heavy attack to create Rellana's vortex of fire, as well as the geysers of fire that shoot through the floor, doing spontaneous damage to anybody that comes close to you. Talking about that insane damage, of course, if you want to mimic it, here are the stats for the character that I was using for the gameplay in the background, and as always, it's a level 150 character, and as you can see, we've got 50 points into Vigor, 11 Mind, 21 Endurance, 44 Strength, 44 Dexterity, 16 Intelligence, as that's the minimum requirement for this weapon, before then having 33 Faith and then 10 Arcane. The 10 Arcane is my base value because I did start as a Wretch, and that goes for all of the other characters going forward as well, so essentially don't delve anything into Arcane. And the reason why we've got 33 Faith and hardly any Intelligence is because I wanted to focus on the Fire Vortex side of the Ash of War and get the most damage I can from that fire damage. But if you wanted to delve into the transient moonlight slashes, again, feel free to swap the Faith into Intelligence, as that will boost the magic damage that you deal with these weapons. But as for talismans, I'm just going to simply throw them up on the screen for you now in the interest of time, so feel free to pause the video and jot these down. But we are indeed going to be using the Shard of Alexander to boost our damage output whenever we do use the Ash of War, before then running Millicent's Prosthesis to again help with those successive damage outputs, as well as giving us a +5 in dexterity, boosting our physical damage as well, before then finishing off the build with the Fire Scorpion Charm and a new talisman in Rellana's cameo, which again will buff our damage output after just holding onto our Ash of War stance by about 2 seconds, which really is nothing, and that will grant us again an extra 20% damage output with the Ash of War. But inside the Wonder Physic, I do highly recommend that you use both the Faith Knot tier as well as the Flame Shrouding Crack tier if you are going to be like me and focusing on the fire side of the Ash of War. But again, if you want to delve more into the magic side of things, feel free to swap those out for both the Intelligence Knot tier and the Magic Shrouding Crack tier. But if you are running the same Faith and obviously focusing in the fire damage, you will have enough Faith to run both Golden Vow and Howl of Shibiri, which will again give us a +15% extra damage boost and a +25% extra damage boost, which is how we're obviously dealing so much damage with this weapon. And as I say, the main star of the show is going to be the unique quick and heavy attacks. The Ash of War is mainly there to punish enemies if you say break their stance and want to use that before you do a critical hit. But of course, either way, these weapons are incredibly fun to use, incredibly cool to use, and can be extremely deadly with this kind of build. But as much as I love these weapons, there are 4 more that I think are just a little bit better than this, so let's swiftly move on to the number 4 spot. And for a number 4 spot, we've got one of my favourite katanas that have been introduced in the DLC, and that is going to be the Star-Lined Sword. Essentially, for those of you that went into Ballarat jail and made your way to the bottom to fight the Swordmaster Owens, this is the weapon that he was using to absolutely kick our butts. But for us to obtain it, we actually need to head towards the Cerulean coast to find the demi-human Queen Mariga, and after defeating this mini-boss, you will be rewarded with the Star-Lined Sword. As I say, it is just a regular katana, so much like the Rivers of Blood, Nagakiba, and of course Uchi Katana, this fits with the same movesets that those wonderful weapons have. But of course, the brilliant thing about this particular weapon is it does delve into intelligence, and much like the Mood Veil in the base game, the Star-Lined Sword also has innate bleed build-up. The skill move Owens Lines of Stars is basically a massive combination of all the attacks that Owens was using himself, and you can press the Ash of War button up to 3 times to complete that insane combination. And as you can see with me using it in the background, the finale of the combination is using a Raptor's Mist move to then come plunging down, do multiple attacks whilst you're rolling towards your enemy, and realistically, if you manage to hit the enemy with every single one of these attacks, you will end up proccing bleed, as well as just doing thousands of regular damage, which can of course make this extremely useful. But not only can you also do that incredible damage, if you time this Ash of War correctly, because you're moving around and obviously using the Raptor's Mist ability, you can indeed dodge your enemy's attacks and punish them with these heavy hitting moves. That of course can be super satisfying, as you genuinely feel like a really cool samurai if you manage to pull that off. And of course, to mimic the damage that we're doing, here are the stats for the character. So as you can see, we've still got 50 vigor, but then we've got 15 mind this time with 19 endurance, followed by 10 strength, 55 dexterity, 45 intelligence, 25 faith, and 10 arcane. 10 are my base stats, so don't put anything into strength or arcane, just make sure that you're hitting the minimum requirements for the weapon. But dexterity is going to be your best friend, as that's going to be the best scaling stat on this weapon. And of course, we can delve a little bit more into intelligence, as with the Ash of War, that is going to be magic based damage, so it would be ideal to pump that up as much as possible. And with the 25 points in faith, that allows us to run both Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength to allow for the extra damage boost as well as the stamina regeneration. But of course, you're also going to want to run these talismans. Again, they're going to be on screen for you, so feel free to pause the video and write them down. But we've got the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, giving us a plus 20% extra damage boost whenever bleed does occur, before then having Alexander's Shard to again boost our damage output with the Ash of War directly. But then we can also use the Two-Handed Talisman, which is again a brand new talisman from the DLC, as we can indeed two-hand this weapon and get the plus 15% extra damage boost with that, before then once again using Millicent's Prosthesis to once again boost our dexterity and give us an additional damage boost whenever we hit successive attacks. And then just to round the build off in the Wonder Physic, I highly recommend running both the Magic Shroud and Crack tier and the Intelligence Knot tier to just get the absolute best that you can out of that insane Ash of War. And once again, this weapon is extremely fun to use and extremely satisfying to use, especially if you get the timing right with those dodges in the Ash of War, and can be extremely potent when used correctly. But there are still 3 more weapons that I think are better than this, so let's quickly move on to the number 3 spot. And coming in at the number 3 spot is going to be the Beast Claw. This is yet another brand new weapon type, and it's actually a weapon that you can get straight away as soon as you load up the DLC, because all you simply need to do is just head a bit south to this wooded area, where you will find an NPC roaming around the woods, and after defeating said NPC, you will get your hands on this incredible weapon. And I must say, the name lives up to its reputation, because this weapon truly is an absolute beast, because it is very similar to the fist weapons that we've had previously, but with the Beast Claws, when you use either a light or heavy attack, you do actually lunge forward, giving you a lot more maneuverability in the boss fights. And of course, you can start attacking your enemies from a little bit of a further distance, meaning that you can essentially always get the first hit in. But they also come with a brand new Ash of War, being Savage Claws, which yet again does exactly what it says on the tin, as when you use this incredible Ash of War, you will just be tearing your enemies apart with a savage flurry of swipes. And did I forget to mention that of course this weapon has an innate bleed build-up, so whilst you're doing all of these crazy swipes against your enemies, you will also be proccing bleed, which is why you are doing the insane amount of damage that you're seeing in the background. The only caveat with this weapon is that it is pretty much exactly the same as any other standard weapon where you have a bleed build-up. You do need to infuse it into an occult version, but I highly recommend keeping the same Ash of War on. So if you just simply take this weapon to a smithing table, apply the same Ash of War being Savage Claws but turn it into a cult version, you will then have a B-rated scaling stat in Arcane, and this will actually allow you to have a much better AR along with increasing your bleed build up per hit. So of course, to get the best out of this weapon after doing that, you're going to need to run these particular stats, and you guys know the drill by now. It's a level 150 character, and as you can see, we've got 50 points into Vigor, 10 points into Mind, 21 Endurance, 22 Strength, 11 Dexterity, 10 Intelligence, 25 Faith, and then 80 Arcane. And as you can tell with the stats there, it's best to pump everything possible into Arcane to give us the best AR possible, whilst also increasing our bleed build up again as much as possible. 80 is essentially the final soft cap for that, and then we just need to make sure that we can actually wield the weapon by having at least 11 Dexterity and 13 Strength. But again, when we change the weapon to an occult version, strength actually becomes the second best scaling factor on the weapon, which is why we essentially pumped whatever was left in the stats into strength. But then 25 Faith also allows us to run both Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength, so again, we can get the damage buffs from both of those incantations as well as the stamina regeneration from Flame Grant Me Strength. But other than that, we need to of course run these particular talismans with this weapon to get the best damage output, and again, where we're going to be making use of that Ash of War to, pardon the pun, tear up our enemies, we will benefit from Alexander's Shard, as once again that will boost our damage output by 15%. But then we've also got Millicent's Prosthesis, because again, this weapon is very fast and can proc the successive damage output very easily, especially when using the Ash of War. But we also get the +5 in Dexterity, which is just a nice little boost to our AR once again, before then giving ourselves a second boost to successive damage output with the Rotted Winged Insignia. And then for our final talisman, I recommend that you run the Lord of Blood's Exaltation to get the +20% extra damage boost whenever a bleed proc does occur. And then for the Wonder Physic, I highly recommend running both the Blood Sucking Crack Tier, which is a brand new crack tier that will again boost your overall damage output by 20%, but at the cost of having your HP drained gradually over time, as well as using the Thorny Crack Tier to give us our third and final boost to successive damage outputs. And essentially, with all of those combined, that is how you're going to be doing the insane damage that this weapon can deal. But as much as I love this weapon and it is really fun to use, there are two more weapons that I think are even better than this, so let me show you one of them right now. Now for these last two weapons, they are going to be some of the most broken weapons that have come out of the DLC so far, and for those of you that are avid viewers of the channel, I have actually already made videos on both of these weapons I'm about to tell you, so feel free to have a guess. Right now I'm going to give you 2 seconds to tell me what is at number 2, because yep, that's right, it is none other than the Blood Fiend's Arm. Like I say, we have already covered this weapon on this channel, as it is quite possibly one of the most broken colossal weapons that has ever graced Elden Ring, because it is again a regular weapon that can have its Ash of War changed, and if you turn it into a Blood Affinity, you will once again have a B-rated scaling in Arcane, which is the first and only weapon to do so when you change the weapon into a Blood variant, and because of this, you can pump the bleed build up to over 230 with, of course, the right stats. That essentially means that with every other hit, you will be proccing bleed, and again, where you can change the Ash of War on this weapon, I highly recommend running the Cragblade Ash of War, because if you weren't already doing enough damage as you were, Cragblade adds an additional 15% to your attack rating, as well as an additional 10% to your poise damage. And with that applied, the damage and the poise damage you're dealing is just quite utterly ridiculous. But to copy the ridiculousness of this weapon and this build, here are the stats you're going to need for that. And again, we've got 50 points into Vigor, 10 points into Mind, 26 Endurance this time, followed by 20 Strength, 11 Dexterity, 10 Intelligence, 25 Faith, and then 69 Arcane. Again, where we've turned this weapon into a Blood variant, Arcane is going to be our best friend, hence why we've pumped everything we can into Arcane. And you're also probably wondering, well, hang on a second, Jazza, you've only got 20 Strength in this build, but actually you need 28 in order to wield this weapon. Well, luckily for us, there's a cool mechanic in the game that when you two-hand a weapon, you will get an additional 50% of your Strength stat applied to that weapon. So essentially, where we've got 20 Strength, if we're one-handing it, we cannot use the weapon, but if we two-hand the weapon, we get that 50% buff, giving us 30 strength in total, which of course meets the minimum requirement. So you are always going to be two-handing this weapon whenever you use it. Otherwise, you are only going to be doing half the damage that you would normally do. But once you've got that down, again, where we've got 25 faith, we can run Golden Vow and Flame of Grant Me Strength once again, before then running this set of talismans to get that crazy damage output. And again, where we're going to be causing a massive bloodbath wherever we go, it is in our best interest to run the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, as we'll pretty much constantly have that plus 20% extra damage boost whilst running this weapon. But then again, where we're going to be two-handing this weapon the entire time, we will also get the plus 15% extra damage boost from the two-handed talisman, and where we're going to be focusing on the charged heavy attacks to do that additional damage with the extra blood splatters, I do recommend running the axe talisman, because again, they'll do an additional 10% whenever you do a charged heavy attack. And then for this one, we finished off with the ritual swords talisman to just once again give us an additional 10% extra damage boost whenever we're at full HP. I'll be honest, those alone will allow you to deal catastrophic amounts of damage, but of course, we've got the Wonder Physic that we can still use, and inside that, I highly recommend that you run both the Spiked Cracked tier and the Stone Barb Cracked tier, especially if you're in later New Game Pluses, because where enemies get an additional poise, the Stone Barb Cracked tier will basically negate their additional poise, and then the Spiked Cracked tier will once again just give us another boost to our charged heavy attacks. And as I've said multiple times already, with all of that combined, you will have access to possibly the most deadly colossal weapon to ever grace this game, and I highly recommend, if you're struggling with the DLC, to give this a go, because I am very sure that the amount of bleed build-up at the very least, or at least the scaling in Arcane, will be altered, and this weapon will be nerfed in the near future. But as much as I can almost guarantee that this is going to be nerfed, the weapon that we have at the number 1 spot is borderline 100% guaranteed to be nerfed, because the damage that it does is just outright ridiculous. And that is because the weapon that we have at number 1, so the best weapon in the DLC, has to go to the lightning perfume bottles, or realistically any of the perfume bottles. And yes, I know that those of you that have been active on YouTube during the cycle of the DLC so far, you have seen about 50 million videos on these particular bottles, possibly also one from yours truly. But the reason why there are so many videos around these bottles is because they are just utterly broken. All but the deadly poison bottle can have their Ashes of War changed, and for those of you that don't know, you can pick up the Rolling Sparks Ash of War just outside of the Shaded Castle. I'll show you the location here on screen, and it is dropped by a silver scarab that is flying in the sky, so of course make sure you kill that silver scarab and you'll get this Ash of War. But essentially, by applying the rolling sparks onto any of the other perfume bottles, you can spam that Ash of War into the ground, and as long as you are nearby your enemies, all of the explosions that would normally happen by spreading the perfume in front of you will happen on the floor directly in front of you, meaning that an attack that would normally maybe hit once or twice, similar to that of the Nebula attacks with the Wing of Astel, now guarantee a hit with every single explosion. And with the right buffs and talismans causing every explosion to do around about 2,000 to 3,000 damage, that quickly allows you to do anywhere upwards of 15,000 damage, if not more, every time you use the Ash of War. And as I've said before, that's extremely broken. I am just going to cut to the chase with this one, because I'm sure most of you have already seen this weapon, and before you even clicked on this video, you knew that the perfume bottles were going to be in a number 1 spot. But for those of you that don't know about these weapons, you are definitely missing out, and I highly suggest that you go and pick one up and grab that Ash of War and apply it to the weapon immediately. And whilst you're doing that, also go into these following stats. So get yourself 50 points of vigor, 18 mind, 21 endurance, 10 strength, 50 dexterity, 10 intelligence, 60 faith, and then 10 arcane. And this is tailored specifically for the lightning bottle. If you are going to be running the chilling bottle, then you will need to take the points out of faith and put them into intelligence. And then if you're running the fire spark perfume bottle, then essentially you'll need to put as many points as you can into dexterity. But the lightning bottle is going to be the best one to use, and again that can be found here at this location just sort of northeast from this Aurelian coast site of Grace. There is going to be one of those large fire furnaces, so basically run past him and run into this lake that's surrounded by a bunch of electric goats, and in the middle of the pond will be the perfume bottle that you can pick up. And then once you've done that, also apply these following talismans. So apply the Perfumer's Talisman, the Aged One's Talisman, Alexander's Shard, as well as the Lightning Scorpion Charm. And by also giving yourself Golden Vow and the Howl of Shabiri, you can give yourself the extra damage boost, and by proccing Madness fully, you will also get the plus 20% boost from the Aged One's Exaltation, and you can buff the boosts even further with the Wonder Physic by applying both the Faith Knot tier and the Lightning Shroud and Crack tier to do the monstrous damage that you're seeing me deal with this weapon. But again, as I mentioned before, if you want to use any of the other bottles, obviously just change the elemental boost that we're using. So instead of the Lightning Scorpion Charm, if you're using the Chilling bottle, use the Magic Scorpion Charm for magic damage. And again, with the Lightning Shroud and Crack tier, use the Magic Shroud and Crack tier instead. And essentially with any perfume bottle, you'll be able to do tens of thousands of damage. And I know it's not the most fun way to play the game, but in a list where we're looking at the top 5 best weapons to use, or at least the most powerful weapons to use, it's very hard to look past these perfume bottles as they just completely annihilate everything. And although that this method is completely broken and is most likely going to be patched by next week, at least at the time of this recording, it is very hard to argue that the perfume bottles are not deserved of the #1 spot. But I want to hear it from you guys. Let me know in the comments if you agree with my top 5 list. Of course, it's subjective to myself. These were just the top 5 weapons that I've used in the DLC and are considering as some of the most powerful and best weapons that you can run around the Shadow Realm with. But feel free to tell me if I'm absolutely wrong or if I've not included a weapon that definitely should have been on here. Of course, try and keep it civil. I'm here to have a discussion with you guys, not shout at you. And everyone has their own opinions and tastes, so I'm pretty sure there is going to be a lot of you that will have an entirely different top 5 to me. But as I say, feel free to let me know in the comments because I'm always intrigued to know what you guys are running and what kind of builds you have now for the DLC. But other than that, if you have enjoyed this video and enjoy the builds and the weapons that we discussed today, then I hope you don't mind me asking you to please hit that like button down below. It genuinely helps out the channel tremendously and is also the quickest and easiest way to tell me that you guys like these top 5 lists and that you want to see more. Of course, I can delve more into specific builds or even give you like say 5 more extremely overpowered weapons. So if you want to see those types of videos, like I say, hit that like button. And if you're new around here, feel free to subscribe to the channel because we're always delving into incredible builds like the ones I've showed you today. So if you want to stay up to date with all of the latest overpowered weapons and stupidly fun builds that you should be running, then make sure that you subscribe down below. But other than that, I just wanted to say a huge thank you for the support that you've shown on this channel so far. Obviously with the lead up to the DLC and since its release, there's been a lot more eyes on the channel and the channel just continues to grow stupidly fast, or at least faster than I could ever imagine, and that's obviously all down to you guys. So like I say, just a big thank you for all of your positive support. It really does mean the world. But before I start yapping too much and start getting too emotional, I'm gonna leave things there. Obviously try all of these builds, they are all very good. Let me know how you get on if you do happen to use any of these weapons. But for now, I guess I will catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.